Just rotate it a little bit.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the April 14th, 2017 Administrative Committee meeting. And we'll get started with approval of Administrative Committee July 24th, 2017 minutes. How'd they look to you?
I wasn't here, but they were well-written, and there was one item, so
Yes.
yes.
Okay, they were good to me, and I was filled in by Gina. Thank you very much. And they were good, and for you too?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the minutes are approved. Second item is Farmers Market Fee Structure Recommendation by Jen Piffner.
Oh, hello. I've got a short presentation, and then there's quite a few handouts in your packet as well. There were two items that we needed to correct in the packet. On page 7 of the actual packet, there's a striped table here. It says Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Just needed to clarify that Tier 2 is 9 to 17 markets, and of course we'll discuss what all this means in just a moment. And then Tier 3 is 18 to 26 markets. Just a little clerical issue. And then I'll talk about the change on page 8 here in just a moment. So I had to clear that up real quick. So this particular project began back in February or slightly before. The Farmers Market Commission took on a strategic planning process late fall of 2016 in an effort to put forth a fee increase proposal as requested by Council in advance of the 2017 season. What we found in February was that the fee structure itself needed some work, needed a review to make it more equitable between vendors, to give it a better, I guess it's about 41 years old now, so it was time to bring it up to speed and make a few changes. Council was gracious in allowing us to look at that over this current season with the idea that it would come back to Council or Committee in July in preparation for the fee resolution, which will be coming forward in a couple of weeks. So just some of the work that we did. We went through a thorough analysis of season and walk-on vendor attendance and fees paid, and that's currently are the only two categories we have for our vendors. We also looked at a proposed tier system. Daniel Stewart, who's our market manager, brought forth an idea that laid out this tier system that I'll get back into here in just a moment. Part of that was looking at specialty spaces. That includes spaces with electricity or truck accommodations or corners. Internal equity concerns. That's really getting back to that season versus walk-on. What does one vendor pay versus another? How do we make that equitable across all vendors? Then we also looked at external equity. We looked at fees that other markets in our region, in the Northwest region, charge, and to see how we matched up with them. And then we modeled some alternatives. We looked at the 2016 season actual fees paid and actual vendor attendance, and we applied a different model to that makeup, which allowed us to run some numbers and get an idea of the impacts that any proposal might have. We vetted the determined proposal with vendors over the last 2 weeks. July 22nd actually was the first day. I visited with all of the vendors at market that day, and the packet of information that you see here was also sent to them the day before. Then we went back on July 29th, visited with them again to see if there were any other questions, if there were any vendors that weren't there the week before, gave them the information, and worked to get feedback. And we did get quite a bit, actually, both for and a few against the proposal, which I'll talk about here in a moment. Was happy to either talk with people in person about that, get emails, phone calls, people drop by the office. So it was really neat to have people come out and talk with us about it. And then finally, where we're at today is presenting a recommendation from the Commission and staff to the committee as to be considered by Council. So the idea behind the new structure of the proposal is a tiered system, and looking at one of the major points of inequity that we found with vendors is you were either a walk-on or a seasoned vendor. And though we had many walk-ons participating at seasoned vendor levels, so that would be 20 markets or more, give or take, they were paying considerably more for the season. For instance, a walk-on vendor that attended all 26 markets would pay $847 for the season, whereas a seasoned vendor who attended all 26 markets would pay $309. So quite a gap there, and that's one of the things that we were looking to alleviate. We also didn't have in place a strict or a clear process how a vendor becomes a seasoned vendor. So are looking at our efficiency of operations and how we can best manage that as well. And really it comes down in the commission and staff's mind to participation. If you're willing to be there for 23 markets, and you're willing to pay the vendor fees for that, then it should be an equal accommodation across all types of vendors. That said, there's one very important caveat throughout this entire proposal that we are still a produce-first market, we are still an agricultural-based market, and we will continue to look at policies and operations and how we ensure that that remains the same. So with that also, just the overall integrity of the market. We wanted to make sure we didn't drastically change the way the market behaves or the way vendors can interact with it, just based on changing the fees. So those were our two big considerations in looking at this process. So with the tiered system, the tier 1 would be similar to a walk-on vendor type now. This is a try it before you buy it kind of idea. If you can only attend a few seasons a year, you would have a lower registration fee, a little bit higher per day fee. You would be allowed to participate in the market. You would not, at a tier 1 level, be guaranteed your same space each week. It gets a little bit difficult when you're only attending a few for planning. For tier 2, that would be any markets that you attend between 9 to 16. So at the beginning of the season, you'd say, yes, I'll be there for, I think I've got 12 on the calendar. You'd pay your registration fee, which is slightly higher. With that slightly higher registration fee, you'd also get a guaranteed location as available. And I keep coming back to guaranteed locations because it's really important to vendors. That's one of the things we heard loud and clear across the board. So that really provides a middle ground that we really don't have right now with the season and the season and the walk-on vendor types. There's no, I just want to come for half the season, pay a little bit more per day, but I'm not committing as much as maybe a tier 3 or a season vendor would. And then the tier 3, or what we're referring to as a season, because it's most like the season vendor participation we have now, is any vendor would participate anywhere from 18, and this is where that typo came into. It should be 9 to 17 and 18 to 26 markets. They would participate for 18 markets or more. They would pay a higher registration fee of $125. The lowest of all the daily booth fees at $15 per booth, but they would also be guaranteed the same location at each market. And that helps us with our planning on our end as well, especially at the beginning of the season, knowing for our current walk-ons, for instance, they may attend 20 markets, but they call in each week to say they'll be attending that week. We'll know that information in advance with this setup. The current and proposed comparison is here, outlines on the left side. We have the season vendor category and the walk-on vendor category, and then the overall proposed structure on the right-hand side. A few things did not change in our fee proposal structure, and that's specific to child vendor, or what we're calling a youth vendor. We do want to change the name of that. Performance art will remain the same, and then our corner space per day cost will remain the same, as well as the truck space, I believe. So in this, our truck space is off on this one. It should be $11 per day across the board.
This is the place that I had questions. So,
okay.
In trying to understand the different categories. So let's say I decide to be a tier 1. I'm a walk-on. I get a booth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need electricity, but I do need a table. But next week, I do need electricity, and I don't want a table.
So for the table space, it's not necessarily that we're renting you a table. It's that you're having a smaller booth size with just a table in that location. So you could do a table space, which would be the reduced costs.
Uh-huh.
The electricity is very limited in the market. We only have several locations, and I believe we have all of those spots are currently taken by seasoned vendors. Which would, I would assume, carry over. Daniel can speak to this a little bit more specifically as for operations. I would assume that would carry over into the next year.
Well, that's why I was wondering, because I've been down there when people have been setting up with electricity, and I wondered if if electricity should be considered part of a walk-on. Because the people that use electricity are mostly the seasoned vendors, so electricity might not be available to a walk-on. So it makes you think that you can get electricity, but you might not be able to get electricity.
Right, and this would be similar to how we've talked about the electricity spaces in the past. We just have to list the cost for that.
Uh-huh.
But it would also be, there is a limitation on the number of spots with electricity. So we'd manage it the same way we have in the past under the current fee structure, but we do need to list it out as a fee moving forward.
Oh, yeah.
So
no,
I think
it's a good idea
I
to
agree.
solicit a fee. I was just trying to understand probability that if I would decide to be a walk-on, would the electricity be available?
Slim
That's
to
the-
none, unfortunately. That's one of the infrastructure issues that we're facing downtown with the market.
Yeah. So should that information be available to, or is it already available to somebody if they wanted to be a walk-on? to know that.
In the vendor packets
Yeah.
that we send out at the beginning of the year, we provide some of that information. Daniel, if he has anything to add to this, can certainly come up. There are
Just because there were so many walk-ons.
I don't know how many walk-ons actually request electricity. It's not one of the numbers I looked at.
Hi, Catherine. Council members. So, Jen's right, and you're right. Occasionally, we have a walk-on vendor with the need for electricity fill a seasoned vendor space, so we need to charge them. For that reason, we need to itemize exactly how much we'll be charging them. The difficulty that we're facing and will approach with layout and, obviously future changes and concerns is the limitation of electricity and how to supply that. So just the same as we've done in the past, it's a case-by-case basis, and we explain to the vendors our limitations and how we can navigate that. Fortunately, some of our downtown business owners are sympathetic to our needs, and they'll offer their spaces or their outlets to us. Yeah.
Wow.
And we'll work out deals with them for the vendors to maybe pay for a day usage, and or sometimes they just donate the electricity.
So percentage-wise, what's the percentage of vendors that want electricity?
I would say very slim, definitely less than 10. You're probably looking at 5%.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very low.
However, if it were more available, I would
You think that more
definitely
people
see
use
an
it?
increase of usage.
Any refrigerators and things like
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah,
Certainly.
stay here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably good.
That's fine.
So when we got down to the equality of the fees that we have for a season and walk-on, we looked at some average daily cost differences, and we found the daily cost to provide the best comparison when we looked at percentage amounts and things like that. Some of the dollar amounts were actually so small that a 200% increase was 50 cents, but it looked horrible at 200%. So we stuck with our per day costs. So on the left of the slide here, we have what's currently charged, and we use 24 days because as a seasoned vendor, you are allowed to miss several markets. 24 is the minimum that you're required to attend as a seasoned vendor. So we looked at if a walk-on vendor participated for 24 markets, what would their average cost per day be? And that's the $32.63. For a seasoned vendor, it's $15.16. So that was one of our first points of, okay, this is a little bit different. Under the proposed tiered system, there would be for Tier 1, and this is an average of if you attended 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, all the way up to 8 days. Similar for the other two tiers, just an average of what everybody, if you participated at each one of those days, would be. So we have a range of $35 down to $20. So it brings down the season, moderates the season and the walk-on vendor system that we have now into more of a graduated tiered approach. And saying that, when we looked at this, our first goal was to maintain revenue to the city at the same level it has been previous years, primarily because some vendors will see $200 increase this season or next season should it go forward, but other vendors would see $350 decrease. So we really wanted to meet that in the middle without implying additional costs in this change. What it does do is set the structure up for if there's a future fee increase, we can look at those moderate increases as we have in the past and apply it evenly without any one group being impacted any more than another. Speaking of budgetary impact, so in 2016, this was prior to our calling out the farmers market as a separate department or division. We estimate total costs at that point were $107,000 for the season. Our vendor revenue at that point was $46,600, and they were operating at about 43% of the market costs. If we go back a few years prior to that, we're more in the 30 to 36% range. And as I said, those are estimated costs, which accounts for the differences along the way. With this proposal, we estimate, and this is again, if we applied this to the 2016 season, the amount of revenue that we believe we would have seen would be $47,271. So it's about $1,000 more, just a moderate a change there. And then for the coming year, we have $143,000 and change 143,000 and change budgeted for the market, which puts us at that 33%. So we're maintaining that historical average with the change, not making necessarily an increase of the vendor subsidization of the market at this point, but we are maintaining that. And then this is just another review of the daily cost in a table format instead of
Was
a
that
chart.
one of your questions to the vendors about them realizing that the city's subsidizing?
My impression is all the vendors are aware of that. It's the question is always how much and what are we responsible for? What's the city responsible for? And those types of things. So
It wasn't one of there hasn't been a question.
no, I don't think there are any vendors that assume the vendors pay for the entire market.
Okay.
I have not gotten that impression. I don't know if you have either.
No.
I don't think they should either.
We did not ask that question specifically. My anticipation would be that they would not be comfortable paying for the full cost of the market, but I think there's also a balance of there's a value that the market provides to the city as a community. There's also that value that it provides to the vendors, and that balance is the tricky part to nail down. So, but we are happy that we're able to maintain with this and provides us the means to move forward in the future with increases as appropriate as determined by council. And
No, and I appreciate that in the documentation. They said we're not trying to make it pay for everything. We're trying to show that we're just putting something in place. That was clear.
And we did look, I mean, the commission looked over the 6 months at a potential increase, but with the changes in the structure alone, adding that increase on top of it was a lot. And it was a lot to digest and to understand. And even the dollar amounts made it more favorable to look perhaps at increases in the future rather than putting that on top of the structure change as well. It just got to be too much. And that's where staff's recommendation and the commission's recommendation came in, is something more in line with maintaining and then looking forward at what we can do fairly for the vendors in the city.
Were you surprised by the number of walk-ons that were paying so much more? I mean, relative to you probably know all those numbers, but the seasoned vendors?
I would say that I was surprised initially last year when I was first hired.
Yeah.
And this was one of several facets I identified as a need for internal change.
Yeah, that's good.
So just a breakdown of what our vendor makeup looked like. And again, these are 2016 numbers, very similar to where we're at in 17, but this was a full season start to finish. So we had 67 walk-ons, 54 season vendors. Of the 67 walk-on vendors, we had 31 that would fall into that Tier 1 category. We had 22 that would fall into the Tier 2, and we had 14 that would fall into the Tier 3 category. So we're talking about a total of 121 vendors that attended market at least once or perhaps more during the season. So looking forward, if we had applied the tiered model to 2016, we would have 31 vendors in the Tier 1, 22 in Tier 2, and then 68 as seasoned vendors. And one of the questions we did get, probably the most often asked question, was how are we going to be able to accommodate all these walk-ons that want to be seasoned vendors? And the response was fairly simple in that the walk-ons are already attending at that level. Yeah. They're just being charged a different amount, and that's the inequity that we were trying to address with this proposal. This also opens up Tier 2, which is kind of a sweet spot that's been missing, that we see quite a bit of attendance in, that would provide a way for people to more fairly participate in the market when it comes to fees and still get a little bit more of a benefit than just calling in week to week or committing to 1 week at a time as they have in the past.
You mentioned that the vendors are uncomfortable paying for the entire cost of the market.
I would say that my guess would be that they would be. We have not asked that question specifically. So yes and no.
Are you wanting them to ask that question?
Well, I think I'm in the desert alone on this whole issue. I don't have three other members of the council that are going to support me. Consequently, it's a moot point.
But it probably has been discussed at the Farmers Market Commission meeting, right? Quite a bit. Aaron, you want to come? Come on up, because I have a feeling, because in the minutes and stuff that I've been reading, it seems like what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't explicitly asked because historically that's never been asked of our vendors, our city council members, and many of our public has found enough value in the market to continue the subsidy. And we've looked historically at the percentage to see how much has been provided by the city and hope to maintain that. We also, even with this change, there are a few vendors who said, I may not be able to afford to be in the market. And so, like Jen said, making this is enough of a change to maybe change a little bit of the makeup of our market, and we need to be very aware of not breaking something that isn't completely broken in all of these changes. And so I think focusing on the fees with as little impact as possible was our goal right now, and then looking forward, what is the charge from the city if that percentage needs to change. But there are vendors right now who said I might not be able to come back into the market, and the last thing we want to do is make a big fee change and have a completely different market, because that's not our goal. Our goal is to preserve what makes our market great. So we haven't asked that because we don't think that it's viable or necessary at this
Do
point.
you worry that if you ask it, it'll scare people away? Or, I mean, I think
it
it's a
would
fair
cause
question.
undue distress at this point in time. I mean, any conversation about fees raises a lot of concern. And it makes sense. They're small businesses, and they're trying to, and they've been very successful in our market. And anytime you have a lot of support from a key stakeholder, like the city of Moscow is for the farmers market, and that stakeholder's even looking like they might pull away, that's a big business, makes a big change in their businesses. So I wouldn't be surprised if they would be alarmed if that was on the table.
Oh, go first.
Just one other comment. We haven't accounted for the market costs in the way that we are this coming year in the years past. It's always been part of the arts department, and the way it's been calculated in the past is very different from how we're looking at actual costs moving forward. So getting a good idea of what those costs are and how some of those measures that we can do to be as efficient as possible, that's kind of new information as well. So it's a balance there. We're no longer accounting for police officers who attend at the market. They're out and about in many ways, shapes, and form. With Daniel coming on full-time, our street closure cost has gone down dramatically. We don't account for that because those are just regular operations of the city and not necessarily specific to the market, in that if the market went away, those costs would go away. So we have looked at kind of more a realistic and actual picture of the cost of the market, and with this separated division, we'll really be able to track that as we move forward and see where we can make improvements and adjustments along the way as well.
Well, like all things, some assumptions are made here. And in your discussion with the vendors, does it look like people will self-sort into the categories that we're looking at? Or might there be any large swings of people who are in Category 1 that move up to Category 2, or from 3 down to 2, or something like that? Or do we just not know that, and we've, under the assumptions that people more or less sort themselves the way they are, move forward with that?
Yes, both.
A little bit of both, but I'm from the discussions that we've had, and we've had quite a few. I'm feeling confident about our vendor self-sorting. Really, this applies fees to how a vendor attends the market, and again, this is another facet to of what I identified as the current fee structure not representing what is actually happening. So this is a little more accurate and allows for vendors to maybe have the additional time off that they.
Yeah, because I'm kind of looking at it as making projections by way of budgets and things like that, and we don't want to get caught out should the structure of the market change drastically and alter the city's commitment, because predictability is a really important aspect here.
Can I say something? The interesting thing when we were looking at all the numbers is, even though we had walk-on in season, and walk-on is very variable and hard to count on for money, but season by budget numbers was very reliable. If you're a season vendor, we get that fee from you. However, the attendance wasn't reliable. And so even though Jen said, like, by policy, they can miss up to 2 markets, well, we had some season vendors who were missing more than that because they don't have produce or whatever it is. And so some of those season vendors aren't going to be, now they have the flexibility to attend less, pay for less, and other people have. What I'm trying to say is the categories didn't matter because our walk-ons were acting like seasons and some of our seasons were acting like walk-ons, if that makes sense. And so even our ability to predict within our own model wasn't incredibly successful financially.
Yeah, I guess you could say we're charging you for what you're getting.
Yep. So we're still a little bit in the dark about where the total impact's going to go, but we are taking our best shot at it.
I wouldn't say a little in the dark, actually. We have quite a bit of light shed on it from our research in the last 2 years. This office has kept great attendance records from when Barry was manager, and then my team and I did it last year and this year, and I'm feeling very confident that we'll be in line with what we expect with regards to those attendance records.
I would think that the vendors were glad when you came around and talked to them and gave them the packets and stuff. Were they receptive to just,
I would even say those with negative comments were grateful that we had, or were at least appreciative of the effort the city made to
I think it's really
approach and make aware of where we were at.
Yeah, and it seems like from all the reading, the commission, led by you, is really very vested in the vendors and that perspective so much.
It's a lot of years. It's not just the last few months of research. I mean, even when the commission started, 5 years ago now, we came in with a stack of papers from the Farmers Market Advisory Board and from Kathleen of knowing that this was an issue. And the numbers are hard, and kudos to Jen for living in them so deeply. And that should be on record that Jen worked very hard in those numbers.
Everybody did.
But the numbers do make it difficult, and making this change is not insignificant, but it is necessary in that we were asked to make change on a very tight timeline with very difficult numbers, fixing problems that have been exacerbated by small decisions over many years. And so we also have to be flexible. We're going to try this, and we have good faith in the best resources that we've ever had to make these types of decisions, but we also need to do our due diligence and take the next season if these do go through and say what did it do to our market and what did our vendors feel, and make sure this isn't just a one and done, and continue to receive feedback.
Seems to me everybody's done due diligence and taken all the information that can possibly be
So
garnered.
much
and-
information.
Certainly tried our best.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where we got to move forward on it.
If just got one more slide, this would be under this proposal. This would be what the draft fee resolution entry would look like, replacing the current market fees. Same figures that we've discussed here, but in that different format. So the fee resolution will be coming next council meeting. So not 2 weeks, but 1 week from now. And we appreciate the council's giving the time to look at this issue more in depth. When we talked about it in February, we thought, well, we'll do some number crunching and do some research and some analysis, and we'll be able to come up with a legitimate and justifiable way to propose a fee increase as requested. But just found that we needed to do some more work. We needed to spend some more time finding what might work best for the market, vet it properly, and spend time with the vendors as well. And we do really appreciate that. So this July timeline was tight, but it was much appreciated.
Yeah,
sure.
well, and the document's really helpful. I mean, as a person that hasn't sat on the commission and only, been to some farmers market, just the general information about what was going on was well written. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And so I guess we'll recommend it just to go onto the regular agenda.
To be considered in the fee resolution would be appropriate as well, since that will be coming forward next week.
Is that okay with you? Yep.
Yes.
Anything else? Okay. And so the fee structure's next? Or is that
No,
going
that
to
was-
take care of that?
that's-
So we're all good
that's
for
that
everything?
one.
Okay.
All right.
Take another one. Good, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is the Vandaltown Block Party, request for a beer, wine garden, and sidewalk cafe expansion.
Yes, and actually, I'm going to have Daniel speak to that. I do have one page we're going to pass out. Daniel's been working hard on getting our event area set up, and we did adjust the map, which is correct in your packet, but the resolution has a typo. So I've got copies of that for everyone, and I just highlighted the area with the change. Instead of 2nd Street, it's 1st Street. And I'll let Daniel cover the basics of the event. He's our community event coordinator. We've got to dial that down, don't we? But he's working on the block party, and I'm happy to have him.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. I'm very happy to be on the team. Excited to be a part of this great tradition. It's been a lot of fun. I've been meeting great people within the chamber and U of I partnering to support this really fun and interactive community event. We needed to extend a first. As I took a little time off, I came back to discover that another business owner had been excited about joining us, and so we'll be expanding to 1st Street. We have 2 stages with live music. The beer gardens are lined out, and we'll also have in-street games, hopefully interactive for students. We have lots of participation from our downtown business owners and other Moscow businesses. So we're just looking forward to putting on a great time for everyone to welcome back the students.
I appreciated the map.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good. I don't have any questions.
I don't either. I think it's a great idea. It's worked very, very well in the past. It's been a good time for everybody, well, meaning me. So, but yeah, I've heard no complaints. I've seen no issues associated with it, and I think it's a really good way to knit the university and the town closer together. I'm all in favor of it.
Yeah. John?
Fine with me.
Okay. Okay, well, with that, then, my screen keeps going black, so I have to keep refreshing all the time. So that's why I'm somewhat delayed. So we'll go ahead and recommend the approval for the resolution, which means it needs to go to regular agenda. Oh, resolutions don't go, just ordinances. Okay. Oh, okay.
I think it'd be good advertising.
Definitely, absolutely, yeah. Regular agenda then, yeah. So you can come talk again.
Well, there's another event happening.
What are we good? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, and the fourth item is amendment to Moscow City Code, Chapter 10-1-24, hyphen 1-24, materials in thoroughfares.
And also should be also 10-1-2.
Oh,
Going
okay.
with the same thing. Good afternoon. I'm going to introduce, I think you know Liz Warner, our
Yeah,
city
yeah.
prosecutor.
Hi.
This issue came up with her, and she helped craft this change of ordinance, the reason for it, and so she's going to present it today.
Okay.
Thank you, council members. So the goal of these code sections, which is Moscow City Code 10-1-2 and 10-1-24, is basically to keep the streets safe and passable so they don't have materials in them, and also to protect the stormwater catch basins from materials being run off into those stormwater catch basins. This is the code section or code sections which enable the city to move the materials that are dumped in the roadways if they don't have ownership, and also cite violations if we have continued noncompliance from someone. So as the code sections read now, it would be unlawful for any person to deposit or place, et cetera. That any person language is what we're proposing to amend. But as it is now, the city is severely limited in what we can do to enforce this code section. We researched the code section and received reports from the code enforcement officer for all the violations within the past year. The majority of these are brought to the city's attention after the materials have been dumped, so the code enforcement officer is made aware of a pile of dirt that's partially in the roadway, potentially near a storm basin, and goes out to investigate it. And usually the ownership of these piles is unknown upon first reporting. There's just a pile of dirt in the road, and what are you going to do about it, city enforcer? So Once ownership is determined, and it is determined in the majority of these cases, the code enforcement officer then explains the code violation to the owner of the dirt and says, hey, you know, this is against the code section to have these materials here. And most owners correct that violation by moving the materials themselves. So very infrequently do we have to actually cite for this code section. The majority of it is a warning, and then owners move the materials, and we don't have a violation anymore. However, we did have a case recently where the owner chose to ignore the warnings and did not move those materials. And so really the modification comes to what the city's options are in situations like that. In that case, a pile of dirt was found. It was partially in the roadway. It was near a storm drain. The ownership was unknown, so city employees went out and began to move that pile of dirt, remove it from the road. As they're doing that, someone approached them, took ownership of the dirt, said, hey, that's my dirt, put it back. I'm going to come get it, you know, put it back. So he actually instructed the employees to return it to that pile. So a time frame and deadline were set up for, okay, if it's your dirt, you need to move it, you know, here's your deadline. The owner never came back to move the pile. It began to rain, materials started filtering towards the storm drain. Big problem. So city employees cleaned up the dirt, and then the owner was cited under this code section. That case went to court trial, went before a judge, and the city lost, because the judge found that while we could prove, the city could prove that the person owned the dirt, and also that the person ordered the city employees to return the dirt to the roadway, we couldn't prove that it was that person that deposited it there. As is the majority of our cases, we don't have a witness seeing the person dump the dirt there. We just find this pile of dirt. So we lost that case and couldn't cite that person. So the current, like I said, the current wording limits what the code enforcement officer can do in those cases where there is a violation after the warning. So thus we have the proposed amended language, which expands that the person language to cite for the offense based on ownership of the dirt pile, so if you claim the dirt as yours, and also agency. So if you're a contractor and you order one of your contract employees to go and dump the dirt there, you, the contractor, can be cited as well. I believe these amendments better fit what the original legislative intent was of these code sections, and would respectfully recommend that they be forwarded to the council.
Yeah, it's good to get the detail on the why, so thank you for filling that in.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions? Yeah.
How far does the definition of public thoroughfare extend? Does that include sidewalks, driveways?
This particular section, and I apologize, I don't have the definition in front of me. I did when we went before the judge. There is a separate code section for materials in a public sidewalk or in the
Thoroughfare.
Well, there's the thoroughfare, and then there's
Public right-of-way.
Public right-of-way. It might be the public right-of-way. There is a separate section that specifically addresses that area between the curb line and the sidewalk, and then the sidewalk as well. Thoroughfare, as it's defined in this section, I believe is public right-of-way.
Yeah, it would be the sidewalk, the tree lawn, the public right-of-way, and the street.
And alleyway ingresses from streets and things like that?
More than likely would fall into that.
Yeah. Because it's all going to run down to the same storm drain and make our water reuse and reclamation folks very unhappy.
Yes.
But I will also just add that there are some times when they have rock material, clean material, when they're on a job site, they can actually get a permit, and that way they can look and see what's being placed there. And if it's not dirty, if it rained and it's not going to cause the problem, they might be able to get a permit to be able to do that and help in the construction. But we do not want people to put piles of dirt next to the road where it will drain into the...
I can see the gravel being advantageous, too. If you're driving machinery back and forth across a curb, the gravel can prevent collapse of the curb, and that's to the benefit of the city in the long run as well.
Right, and that's, in those situations, there is a way to go about getting a permit for those through our engineers, and they're very open about, hey, as long as it doesn't, have small material that'll run into the storm water, we're more than happy to do these permits. It's the after the fact coming back when there's material that is dirty and running into the storm drains that we have these issues. like I said, the majority of folks,
Yeah.
want to be in compliance and will go and pick up the materials, and it's not a problem. And that's why, of the, I think, 14 total that we've had in the past year, we've only had one that hasn't responded to that warning and actually followed through on it. And if the city is limited and the code enforcement officer is limited to where she can't cite for those, that's behavior is going to continue, which is a huge concern.
Right, and the language is cleaned up, so it doesn't matter who puts the dirtiness there.
So we don't have to prove that the person deposited it,
Right.
because the majority of the time we don't have any evidence that they were the person who deposited it. It's not a. I wish cases were handed to me that nicely. Here's a picture of the person dumping the dirt, but unfortunately that isn't the case. We have down the line people who take ownership of it, or just kind of addressing the issues that we respond to the majority of the time.
I like it. It's good
Yeah.
cleanup language to assist in
That's
what
a good
we
idea.
want done.
Yeah, especially now that you've had to experience it and you've got a solution. That's
Yes.
great. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Unpleasantly experienced.
Yep. So we'll move this on as an ordinance. So that it goes. We'll have it in front of the whole council.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. I think there are no other items on our agenda. If there's anybody that'd like to speak to the administrative committee, okay. All right. So with that, we will close.